Hi, I'm James Whiffen. I'm a freelance compositor from Brisbane, Australia. In this creative development, we'll be creating this space scene. We'll create the first shot in the sequence from start to finish in real time, as well as looking at the process of creating the second shot. These lessons will cover many aspects of a visual effects pipeline, starting with looking at a method of pulling clean keys with motion blurred green screen footage. Then we'll move on to match moving in PF Track, and then animating that match move in Maya to give our astronauts some additional movement. We'll be modelling, texturing and lighting our moon terrain, and then compositing everything in After Effects. So let's get our ass to Mars, and I'll see you in lesson 1. In this lesson, we'll be keying out footage. I have both shots here. We'll be mainly working on shot 1. Both need to be keyed as we have green screen in both, but I think this shot can demonstrate a few more things. So let's just quickly survey our footage. You notice we have green screen on most of the shot, but we have a lot of other things around. So that'll be our first step, is to sort of mask out the parts we don't need. So a quick way of doing this is actually using key light, and we can create a very basic mask around our character. So I'll just come in here, zoom right in and sample some footage, sample some green screen, and get a nice key. So I want to get pretty much all the white. Don't worry about any crunchy edges, things like that. So once we've done that, let's go Alt-4 to get out of alpha, and let's negative shrink the matte. So let's bring it out like this. If we set this to source, unfortunately we can't really use any replace methods. We do a great job of getting rid of spill, but unfortunately they're very, very noisy. So set that back to source, and that helps us a lot. So now we can just grab the pen tool and mask out any areas we don't need. We need to animate this. So come down to mask path. So we don't really need to make too many keyframes. That should pretty much do us. So I'll just quickly go to Alt-4 to check the alpha and make sure that I'm not cutting anything off. That's pretty good. Okay, well with that done, we can actually key our footage. So, call this 1 mask, so that's step 1, the masking. I'll drag that into a new column. This can be step 2, keying. So let's drag another key light in here. Now the green screen changes color a bit. We have it at the start, it's sort of darker, and then it gets lighter as the character sort of moves into where the spotlight is. So I'm not sure exactly where I want to key it from. I'm going to try at the start. Oops. And come in here, and if you hold down shift you can sample more than 1 pixel. And once that's done, I'm going to come down to the screen matte. Come down, I'm going to check that. I'm going to bring that clip black in quite a lot. The best results is when you can leave these clip white and black values as close to the default as possible. So we'll see how we go with this. That's not looking too bad. So again, we'll set the replace method to source, and let's sort of fix up these edges here. What I might do is add a matte choker. And for the settings of this matte choker, I don't really need to choke it too much, or as much as that is, maybe 40. And the geometric softness I might take to 8. Got some nice clean edges here. For the shrink I might go -1. Actually might go 1. -1. and for the softness, I'm not sure if that'll make much of a difference since we're matte choking afterwards, so I'll just check. Nope, not making too much of a difference. Pre-blur should also not make too much of a difference considering we're choking afterwards, so won't worry about that. So I'll just quickly check different parts of the footage and also the alpha. It's looking pretty good. I'll see if I can sort of take this back a little. Nope. You have to keep it high at this value here to sort of prevent too much of this dark area. This area here, if we grab the source footage, is sort of where the shadow of the light is. So that's probably the worst area that we're going to have in this key. I'll turn that off. We've done our key. We've done our matte choker. The thing about the matte choker is you sort of the same softness edge everywhere. It's sort of this quite clean edge throughout. But again, if we have a look at our source footage, maybe I'll switch to a different frame, you can see they actually have a fair amount of motion blur in this footage, and you'll certainly not get that with the matte choker. So what we can do is add some forced motion blur to our footage. But this footage already has motion blur, so if we added, let's say, real smart motion blur to this footage, you get some really nice edges. But the problem is that we're blurring footage that already has blur. So if you have a look at the flag here, we take that off. We don't want to be adding motion blur to motion blur. We want to apply this just to the alpha. So I'm going to make a new comp and call this 3 alpha blur, and in here we have the keying. Might just add another keying in here. In the keying, that's all good. Just making sure I didn't have the RSMB turned on in there. I'm going to add it to this layer here, and this will be the alpha blur, and we'll add the RSMB. And just to give RSMB as much information as we possibly can, I'm just going to let it source the original footage so it has a bit more information. And together that would be the alpha blur again. So in here, we actually don't need that. So here we have the completely blurred footage, and I just want to take the alpha of that. Now, if I go to the alpha channel and take a screenshot, we have this nice alpha, but if I alpha matted it here and turn this layer on, we're not getting anywhere near as nice a result. And that's because we had transparent pixels, some transparent pixels here on our edge, and then that was matting more transparent pixels, so that's sort of this odd, yucky result that we get. It sort of looks good in the RGB, it looks pretty nice, but this has a much nicer edge. So we need to try and get some of that back. So instead of matting this pre-keyed footage, we'll matte the original footage, and that will help us not have any of those transparent edges matting transparent edges. So this will be the footage CC, and I'm going to color correct this, and the reason for that is if we come in here and just alpha matte this, we get the nice edges, but we sort of get these sort of darker parts where the green screen is sort of matting the transparent blurred footage. I'm actually going to go into here and turn down the blur amount to 0.4. I think it's slightly too much in comparison to our normal footage. But again, we have to come in here, we have to deal with these edges here. So in the footage CC, I'm going to add hue and saturation. Come down to the greens, desaturate them. Now if we scrub through, we can see we have some splotches here we're not getting rid of, I don't think we're actually getting rid of any color that we actually need, but there is some green that remains on these default settings. So let's expand these out. Not too far, but enough so that we can get rid of some of those parts. So that pretty much does it. Not losing pretty much any color that we need, because all we have is white and blue and red. We don't have any green, which is very handy for us. So with that on, got no more spill. If we come back into our alpha blur, we can see that we've gotten rid of the spill, the green, but we still have this sort of dark halo. So I'm just going to make a white solid, and this will help see what's going on here. Yes, we have slightly dark edge, and that'll show up on white. Fortunately, this is a space scene, so this would technically be black and it would look awesome. But just to try and get the best key as possible, we can go back into our keying, maybe play with the screen mat. Maybe make that -2. We came back, sort of helped that a little bit. It's not perfect, but that should be pretty good for us. If we had the alpha blurred footage, or the keyed footage in here, alpha matting, I don't think we don't have that as much, but again, I'd prefer the nice soft edges of this color corrected footage. You could play around in the key to get rid of more of that, any problems that we're having there, but I don't really want to check the edges too much. That dark edge is coming from this shadow on this light, and that's where we're getting that. So if I come back into my alpha blur, I might make this 0.35, and then the keying -2.5, and here we have pretty much removed that darker area. And if we go to our alpha, we have very nice alpha. If we preview it, the RSMB is only giving us motion blur in parts that need it, so it's looking really good. So that's pretty much an overview of the keying of shot 1. Shot 2 is pretty similar. We just have, there's a fair amount of paint and rotor that needs to be done, because we have areas like this rim where it's glass reflecting or plastic reflecting the green screen that needs to be painted and such. So I won't be going through that process, but I will be supplying the mats for both shots 1 and 2 in the project files if you don't feel like keying the footage yourself. So that's pretty much it for lesson 1. I'll see you in lesson 2, where we match move our shot 1. In this lesson, we'll be match moving our footage inside of PFTrack 2011. I've loaded my shot in already, and let's just have a look here. You see that we've got some very strong lines across the top of the screen with these beams on the top of the roof, and they sort of look bent, and that's because of our lens distortion. So to help get rid of that, we can right click, add undistort node. You see we have this grid here. I'm going to hit new line. Essentially, if we draw a straight line on objects that are meant to be straight but are currently bent, like these beams, PFTrack will be able to determine or undistort the footage based on that information. So let's try and be as accurate as possible. Zoom right in, make a point there, and make the other point here. So this is a very straight line, and this is how the beam should be, but we can notice that the beam is actually bent. So I'm going to come to the very middle of the line and make a point and drag it to where it should be. And PFTrack's pretty good at getting an accurate result from just one additional point. So once I've done that, I can hit solve. And now you'll notice that this beam here is straight. It's as straight as the line that we drew, so that's very good. So with that done, we can right click and add an auto track. Now I'd like to hit preview so I see the points that are going to be created, and I'm going to increase the candidate number to maybe 150. I want more points, and make the window size a bit bigger. And also I'm going to change the feature scale from small to large. If you notice in here when we had it set to small, the points are sort of more along. These are actually false positives here, because that's not actually a point, that's just a point where the beam sort of looks like it intersects with the roof, but that position is going to actually be changing based on our view, where the camera's looking, so that these points all along here are incorrect. These points here are correct, but all of those are not. I find that if I change this from small to large, I get a sort of a better result, or less of those. We still have some of them, quite a few, but we can delete those afterwards. Okay, so some other settings I'd like to change is the search mode from better speed to better accuracy. I've tracked this footage before, and with better speed, we have a lot of areas in this footage where it's sort of repeating. Looks the same in multiple areas, all along here, and even these actually look the same. And if you have it set to better speed, these points are going to be jumping around in between these different, pretty similar areas, and that's going to, as soon as it does that, it's completely inaccurate, and PFTrack's probably just going to filter it out anyway. But I'd like to keep these points, so if I want to keep them, I need to prevent them from jumping around. So I'm going to choose better accuracy. I can also choose optical flow, but I'm going to be using better accuracy. So that's pretty much it. Let's go ahead and track this. It might take a little while, but the better accuracy, the time it takes, is certainly worth it, because otherwise you have to spend time going through and deleting them, and that can always take longer. So let's auto track. Alright, that finished. So you'll notice we have a lot less trackers than we started with, but I'll need to go through and delete any of these false positive ones. So all of these here, delete any ones that look suspicious. Actually, you know what, I'm going to leave those ones at the bottom in, just because we don't have any others, and I don't think they'll be that inaccurate. Things like this one certainly need to go. Ones like this, you can see that they're pretty accurate to a certain point, like up to here, and then it just goes bonkers, so we can just remove forward. There's no point deleting the whole tracker for the sake of one frame. Normally I'd delete points like this, but I think I might just keep them in for now. I might get rid of them later if they're causing trouble, just because we don't have any points up at the top of the roof. And it's probably one of the closest points to the camera that we actually get at the start, because all the rest of the points are all over here. We get plenty of points later on, but at the start we've got next to none that are sort of anywhere near the camera, and we really need some of those. Okay, so once that's done, I'm going to go and add a camera solver, and let's just solve all of these points. Let's see what we get. Not too bad. At the start we have a little bit of wobble, but actually not too bad. I might just go to the back to the camera solver. If you go to the errors, actually change the threshold if we hit trim. Currently set to about 1.5. I'm just going to lower it down to 1, and then refine all. Probably didn't make much of a difference, but don't have any of those red trackers in anymore. And it's a lot easier to tell whether you've got a good solve or not if your scene is a bit better oriented. So let's add the orient scene node and put a few methods of orienting the scene. I'm just going to go to axes first and turn off the Z and Y and sort of just try and orient this a bit better. Okay, so once I've done that, I'm just going to go translate and move this down, sort of more where the ground would be. Maybe scale it up a bit. It's one of these boxes PF Track is saying is 1 meter. We can change that when we export it, but I just like to size it up so I can see more of the grid. Because when we get to the start, it's sort of, if the grid's too small, you won't really be able to see it. So that's looking pretty good. Might just do a bit of rotation. Now you'll see that it sort of goes a little bit funny there. It actually won't matter much because this we've already keyed this piece of footage, and this is just going to be a card in 3D space. So although it is going to look a little odd seeing the background sort of do that at the start. So what I'm going to do is go to the camera solver, camera, and actually choose the high smooth option and then refine all. Just keep hitting refine a few times, there we go. And it's just a little smoother now than it was before. It's still got that little odd movement there. Maybe it just looks odd because it's so far back and the green screen is much closer. I think it needs to be rotated a bit more. I'll set this point here as the origin if I can select it. Orient scene, none, select that set origin there. And then I'll just translate, move it over a bit. So the origin is sort of in the middle of the scene, and that's currently on the green screen, so I'd like the origin to be a bit forward and a bit down because that point was a little higher than the ground plane. So something there is actually the ground plane, and then I'll go rotate and rotate it just a little bit. Something like that. So you might need to actually zoom out to be able to see what's going on with the grid. And not bad. So it's going to add in the distortion that we took out, add distortion, and by default I believe it adds the exact amount that it calculated in the undistort node, which is handy. Okay, so let's export this. Right click and add an export node, and I'm going to be using my 2011 ASCII and scale around 5. I think it's going to be easier to work with inside of Maya. And for the file name, call this the shot1 matchmove.ma and export scene. Export succeeded, good. Okay, so in this lesson we match moved our footage, and in the next lesson we're going to begin setting up our scene inside of Maya. In this lesson we'll be opening our match move from PF Track inside of Maya. So let's open up that scene, shot 1 match move, and here it is. So let's quickly go and have a look at our camera. Scrub through, everything looks good. So as we can see, this astronaut he's sort of just jumping on the spot because there's not really enough room to move around inside the studio. So what I'd like to do is actually animate him moving forward in Z-space every time he jumps. And we can't really do that with a viewport, which is where we're currently seeing this image here. So we're going to actually add our own card, polygon card, and put a texture of this character, and then we'll be able to move that forward in Z-space. But before we do that, let's just zoom out here. We can see that our viewport background is ages away, especially considering the fact that that's the stage, the green screen stage there, and the astronaut will be somewhere in between that and the camera, somewhere around here. So what we need to do is just click and drag, and we get some settings for this viewport background, and currently the depth is what's controlling that, and it's set to 900. So let's just lower that drastically. 50. I want this to be where the astronaut would be, just sort of halfway between. Let's try 20. That's looking pretty good. Maybe a little bit less, maybe 15. Okay, that looks good. Doesn't matter too much. So what I'm going to do now is create a card for this. So create a polygon plane, which would be create polygon plane. I'll just go to the settings and let's make this 10 by 10, and just need a very simple piece here. Now hit 6 so I can see it, and I'm going to go to the hypershade, window, rendering editors, hypershade, and when that loads we're going to create a Lambert, and in this Lambert we'll go attribute editor, color, and set that to a file. And we'll just quickly change the filter. It's one is quite heavy, and then we'll go image, and we'll find under footage, shot 1 keyed, and here we have PNGs. And then if I go to hypershade, if I can drag this onto our card there, and then in Lambert 2, I probably want to set this to use image sequence. So you can actually see we have the astronaut here now. And let's align this with our with the viewport background. Now, fortunately, there's no real easy way to do this, so we'll just need to do it manually, because if we set any of our snapping options, it's not going to snap to this viewport. Even though there is a setting called snap to view planes, that's more for creating polygons. It doesn't actually let you snap to the view plane. So we'll just have to line up each of the 4 vertices. It won't take too long. We'll just get in the general position before we worry about aligning it exactly. So that's sort of there. Now we'll grab this one here, this is the top, and I'll check it in the top view. And I'm not sure which one it is, but it's one of these. I'll just try doing it this way and see if that's correct. Just quickly take a look. Nope, it was the other way around. We have this funny looking X. So it's probably good to get this pretty precise, so I might come in and get these as precise as possible, and then I'll go into all the different views to get them as accurate as possible, and then I might just fast forward this because you don't really need to see me fiddling. Okay, so once that's been done, let's save it because we've actually made some progress. So I like to always save the file as something else so that we're not actually messing up the match move too much. So I'll just call this shot 1, and we'll actually say this in my binary. And there we go. And so we have this viewport, and then we have our image plane. They're pretty much exactly aligned. And just to make sure that they are correct, or the UVs are correct, you can just push it out maybe one step and see, yes, they are both correct. So take note of what frame you're currently on. I'm currently on frame 149, which is an odd frame. I just happened to be there. But you'll notice that the match move, or the viewport background of the match move camera is moving, but this card isn't. We need that camera to drive the movement of our card. So on the frame that you aligned it, it's very important to have the exact frame. So mine is 149. We just need to go into our outliner, and I'm going to make a copy of this camera. So this camera here is actually in a group. That's the group, this is the camera, this is the tracking markers or the locators. And what I'm going to do is copy this camera. Now I actually, my 2013 is very buggy for me when copying, so make sure you've saved it beforehand. So copy, paste, okay, that went pretty well. And just bring the camera out of all of these groups that it creates. And I'm going to call this one static cam. And the reason I'm calling it static cam, even though it has movement, is because this is the camera that's going to simply be giving its movement to its child, which is this polygon plane. So let's put the plane inside the static cam, and it will now inherit those movements. So no matter where we are in the timeline, the viewport and the polygon plane should be exactly aligned, and that's what we want. And now we can now animate this polygon plane forward in what's currently Z space, I think. And this camera here will be the camera that we render from. This will be the render cam. And this camera will actually be moving forward in Z space as well. But we'll get to that in a minute. So in this lesson we set up our Maya scene, and in the next lesson we'll begin animating our astronaut card and our camera. So in this lesson we'll be animating our astronaut footage. So let's focus on animating this polygon plane here. And I'll call this the astronaut card. And again, save. To help us not have these two image planes sort of clipping each other, we can just go into the static cam. We probably need to go into the render cam as well. Just go to the viewport attributes, and let's set the image plane to looking through the camera so that we don't see it anywhere else besides in here. And we should also go into the channel box editor and of the static cam, select these and lock them. And the reason for that is so that now we can't accidentally disturb camera and completely ruin our match move. Now the render cam, we can also do the same. Let's lock these. So now we can't accidentally move them, and I accidentally just moved the astronaut card just a little bit, so I'll hit Z to remove that. We don't want to be moving that at all, but currently I can't lock its attributes. We could maybe lock the X and Y, but we'll do that in a minute. So if I go into perspective view, let's have a go at animating the card. And I can still see an image plane here, so that's probably from the render cam. I forgot to go into panels perspective, render cam, and set that to looking through camera. So now in the perspective view, the only time I'll be able to see well, the only thing I'll be able to see is the astronaut card. Now currently I don't get any, I'm not seeing anything. So what I might do is go to renderer and change it to viewport 2.0 and see if that makes any difference. Currently not. I'm not exactly sure why that's not working, but maybe if we create a new Lambert like I have here, Lambert 3 now, I'll just go into those settings, Lambert 3, and then if you go into textures you can bring file 1 down here, and then drag this into the color channel and then the transparency, and then we should have our astronaut. And I'll just turn on the wireframe as well so we get the border, and that looks good. So there we have it, our astronaut. And so now we can begin animating it. It's a little laggy in the Maya viewport, scrubbing between frames, so I find it easier just to open up After Effects. I've just imported the footage into a untitled project, and I'm just going to use this to see whereabouts the character should be jumping. I get a lot quicker playback in here, and I can also watch it in real time if I cache it to RAM. So I want the character to jump forward, or begin moving forward in Z when this character is jumping. So he's jumping, and when he's in the air, that's when he should be moving forward. So at frame 0, he's actually in the process of jumping, and he sort of hits the ground around frame 28. Okay, so with that in mind, let's grab this here, frame 1. Actually, this starts at frame 1, so just to be as accurate as possible, hit Control K in After Effects. Start it at frame 1. So now we have exactly the same frame numbers. So frame 1, he starts jumping, and he's sort of there by frame 28. He shouldn't really be moving forward as he's just about touching the ground. So at frame 1, let's set a key for Z, I think it is. Let's just check. If I was in render cam, panels perspective, render cam, and this moved forward in Z, yes, that's exactly the direction that I want it to be. So, and just to make sure, if you go into perspective and the move, in the move settings, make sure it's set to object. If it was set to world, it may not be correct. So I'm going to actually lock X and Y for now, so I can't accidentally move those. And in Z, on frame 1, I'll start the key selected. Now I'm just going to make up a certain amount that I'm just going to say that he jumps every time he jumps the same amount every time he jumps, like the same distance. So at frame 28, he can jump, let's say, what have we got? It's in the negative, so it started at negative 16, maybe he jumps negative 10 each time. Let's go negative 26. And we really won't know how much we want him to jump forwards, but we can easily adjust all keyframes later. So let's just get the number of 10 for every time. So we've done frame 28. He sort of begins jumping again at frame 35. So he has a little break, and then he has another jump, and he gets air until around frame 69, 68. And then he can be negative 36. And back in After Effects, he begins jumping again around frame 80, maybe frame 79. And then he's in the air until roughly frame 115. Maybe negative 46. And then takes a break until 123, maybe 122. And it jumps until 154, 153. To negative 56. It's quite far away now, but don't worry about that. And then he does another jump. He starts at maybe 163. And then obviously he's not going to be able to make a full jump there. This would probably be less than half, so he can do a jump of 4 pixels or 4 units in that. So we probably don't need to worry about keyframing the Y. If you wanted to make it look like his jumps were bigger, then he jumps higher as well as jumping further along in Z, then I would keyframe the Y along with the Z in tandem. But I think because he jumps, he's physically jumping up in Y in the live action footage, I won't worry. But in this lesson we began animating our astronaut footage. In this lesson we'll be refining the animation of our astronaut as well as animating the match moved camera. Let's actually make the camera move forwards as well. If we just go into the render cam, obviously we can't have a character just bounding forwards like this, getting smaller and smaller, because he's being cut off. This wasn't a full wide shot. We don't get to see all of him. So the camera itself has to go with him, it needs to follow him. And we'll be doing that by going into Outliner, and we can actually keyframe the PF data. This is a group, so we can keyframe this fine. Otherwise you'd have problems. You might have to do some expressions to keyframe all these keys here, or you could simply, if you didn't have your match move in a group, you could just assign it to a locator and then keyframe that locator. But this group here will act as our locator. So at frame 1, we'll keyframe Z. Frame 170, we can key it as well. I've got auto key turned on, I think. So let's go forwards. Just hit W. Now this is moving forward in world, and that's not really what I want. So what I'm going to do is just move it forward in, I'll just key all axes for now. Key all of these, and now I can move it forward here and then here as well. So we're getting a bit closer to our character. Now he's going up, so we'll have to move this up as well, and just want to get a bit closer. Alright, something like that for a rough animation. Let's just go in here, and actually before we preview it, I'm going to click on our astronaut card and go to the graph editor, which is under Window Animation Editor's Graph Editor. And if I selected the Translate Z and then sort of framed it up, we're getting this, these sort of tangents here. So that's probably going to look a little odd because it's sort of linear. He's not speeding up or slowing down at all. So let's actually just do a play blast and see what this looks like. Let's go Window, Play Blast, and I want the time slider. I want the view that I'm currently in. Won't worry about, actually I'll keep the ornaments in. QuickTime, H.264, quality 100. It won't be able to actually preview 1080 considering I'm recording at 720, but if you set it to this, it'll record at the max resolution it can. at a scale of 1, frame padding 4 is fine, and just need to choose where we want it to go to. So yeah, in the Maya project structure, just set it to movies, and it'll save in here. So this will be test animation, and let's play blast. Okay, the play blast is finished, and this is what we get back. So it's a little hard to see what's going on because although the character is moving forward, the camera is also moving forward with these markers, so we have no bearing in space. So to fix that, what we can do is either make the grid a lot bigger. You can do that by going to the preferences and changing the scale, set that to meter, but our locators get drastically larger as well. So I just set that back to centimeter and make my own ground plane. Or you could place some objects like polygons, cylinders and such in the background, but I'll create a ground plane, except I need one with a few more divisions. Let's go 50-50. And let's create that and scale it up. Sort of bring it out. Okay, so let's do another play blast. We've got all the settings down pat, so let's go window play blast and overwrite that original one. Couldn't create it, that's probably because I've still got it in VLC, so I'll just close VLC and try again. There we go. Okay, here's our play blast, and we can actually see what's going on now thanks to the grid. Although it might have been handy to add in some other objects, we can see what's going on and see what needs to be changed. So first of all, don't worry too much about the fact that in some parts the astronaut is sort of not filling the screen and he's sort of getting cut off, because this shot's going to be 235 instead of 1920 by 1080, but I'm actually going to render 1920 by 1080 just so I have the freedom to crop the shot however I like inside of After Effects. So don't worry about that. Now we can sort of see it's those linear interpolation of the astronaut card is sort of making the animation seem jerky. So to fix that, we can select the card and then go to the graph editor, wherever you are. And what I'd sort of like to be is maybe we have all the different interpolations here. So we can change the tangents to all these different things. I'm going to try plateau. Let's just try the other ones as well. So flat or plateau seems to be doing it. And I'm not sure exactly how I want it to land. Currently he lands pretty abruptly, and I sort of think that's how it would happen since there's very low or no gravity on the moon. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I wouldn't really be interested in doing that. I think, you know, no one really eases in when they're falling to the ground. So I'll probably just have the plateau on all the parts where he jumps. So let's go plateau, and this one here I'm actually going to have to well, it sort of just looks odd. It's different to the rest because it's cut short, so it's affecting the tangent. So I'll just move it to sort of where it would be, and that can sort of help it make the last semi-jump look more natural. So we'll see how that goes in a minute. What I also want to change is under outliner. If we bring up the PF data again, well, this is like the camera group, I'll just call it that. This is the camera group, and in the graph editor, actually this is what I want. I didn't really want it to ease in or out, so I'm pretty happy, but if you wanted to have the camera sort of ease in and out, you could apply the plateaus to these here. But I think that's good for now. I'll do another play blast, and if I'm happy with that, we can move on. Okay, it's finished the play blast. So let's have a Let's have a look. So it's good how he sort of lunges forward. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. Now, I'm not sure if I want the camera to sort of the render cam to move as much. Maybe it could sort of let the astronaut sort of get out of frame a little bit. Let's just see, in the perspective view, if I go outliner camera group, I think I'll push it a little to the left so it's sort of more square on, and also zoom out a bit. Yeah, I sort of want to end it sort of square. And I can just, if I spacebar, I can sort of just scrub through. Let's see. So, something to keep in mind, although we're doing 235 and we don't have to worry too much about where the character is sort of cutting off, the thing is we can't crop any lower than the highest point at which this character goes or is cut off screen. So currently he's sort of cut off maybe 100 pixels down the bottom. So that means we can never ever show more than that, because otherwise we'll see the gap where he is. So to make sure that we're not cutting too much off, can move the camera up just a bit. So translate Y, let's try 7. 7's a little high, so 6.5. And let's just see those problem frames where he's sort of, he's less cut off in those starting frames. Or what we could do is actually lower it at the start here, and because it's sort of towards the end, he's fine. He's not being cut off, but it's at the start. So maybe we could go -1. Just try that. No, we need to go high. So we could try maybe 1. Yeah, and this way he hardly gets cut off at all. We don't actually get to see him for the first 20-something frames, but that's fine. I'm actually going to lower this a little bit. Let's go 0.5. Don't want to move it too much. And here we cut off a bit, but I think that's the furthest it gets cut off, so that's not too bad. Okay. And then I might actually move him up a little bit, so move 5.8. At the end, move 5.7. Because at the start that he's getting cut off. Okay, so happy with that. In this lesson, we animated our camera and refined the animation of our astronaut. In this lesson, we're going to create some of our moon environment. Let's just have a quick look at what the camera is actually doing. It's just moving forwards. And what would be cool is if the camera, as it moves forward and sort of tracks down, it sort of goes down in Y, it sort of goes through, and the astronaut travels through sort of like a valley, a very shallow valley. So there's sort of rocks on the left and right. And before we do that, I'd rather orientate the scene so it's sort of like it's traveling down the z-axis. Now we can't really do that at the moment because we have lots of different things and they're all keyframed and such. So what I might do is create a locator and call this one called transform, and then I'll put everything, just put the camera group, static cam and such inside the world transform. So everything is the same. everything happens the same. However, now we have a locator that we can easily rotate to sort of aim the camera so it goes down Z instead of sort of heading off in this direction. So if we rotate it like that, it'll be easier for us. I'm just going to go to the top view to get it as accurate as I can. And if I have a look, and I just go back, have a look. Move it on a little bit, cameras are traveling down Z, and that makes it easier for us. We can simply create a ridge here and a ridge there, and then maybe a mountain back here. And the way we're going to be doing that is with displacement maps. So let's create a piece of geometry for our displacement maps. I'm going to create polygon primitives plane. Now, there's some funny settings that you need to be aware of inside of Maya, and the first is the actual scale of your geometry. I found that if you create a really small piece of geometry and scale it up, the displacement doesn't look as good. You can freeze your transformations, but it's just easier to create a In this lesson, we're going to create some of our moon environment. Let's just have a quick look at what the camera is actually doing. It's just moving forwards. And what would be cool is if the camera, as it moves forward and sort of tracks down, it sort of goes down in Y, it sort of goes through, and the astronaut travels through sort of like a valley, a very shallow valley. So there's sort of rocks on the left and right. And before we do that, I'd rather orientate the scene so it's sort of like it's traveling down the Z-axis. Now we can't really do that at the moment because we have lots of different things and they're all keyframed and such. So what I might do is create a locator and call this one called transform, and then I'll put everything, just put the camera group, static cam and such inside the world transform. So everything is the same, everything happens the same. However, now we have a locator that we can easily rotate to sort of aim the camera so it goes down Z instead of sort of heading off in this direction. So if we rotate it like that, it'll be easier for us. I'm just going to go to the top view to get it as accurate as I can. And if I have a look, and I just go back, have a look. Move it on a little bit, cameras are traveling down Z, and that makes it easier for us. We can simply create a ridge here and a ridge there, and then maybe a mountain back here. And the way we're going to be doing that is with displacement maps. So let's create a piece of geometry for our displacement maps. I'm going to create polygon primitives plane. Now, there's some funny settings that you need to be aware of inside of Maya, and the first is the actual scale of your geometry. I found that if you create a really small piece of geometry and scale it up, the displacement doesn't look as good. You can freeze your transformations, but it's just easier to create a larger piece of geometry and then scale it down. So I'm going to go 1000 by 1000, and also these divisions here. If you don't set enough divisions to begin with, the displacement subdivisions inside of Maya cap out really quickly. So if we just had one division, we'd hit the max amount of subdivisions pretty quickly inside the displacement settings. So it's always best to have more geometry than you need, and then you can just have less subdivisions in your displacement settings and you'll never run the risk of capping out. So with that done, let's just click to create our plane. It is rather large, but that's alright, we can just scale it down. So this needs to cover the entire area that the character walks on. We're on frame 1, so he starts in the middle of that green screen, so we probably don't need this geometry to be that far back, and at the end he ends up all the way back there. So I'm thinking this is probably good enough. I might just scale it up just a little just so we're safe, and I want this to be around where his feet are. So we can see at the moment his knees, cut stuff about his knees, so I'm thinking this would probably be where his feet are. And let's just check to see start, it's actually cutting off. This is probably around where his waist would be. So to sort that out, I'll rotate it a little bit. Actually, we'll rotate it later. Let's just get the basic. I've got the position done, so let's create the material or the displacement. So as I was saying before, I sort of wanted a ridge here and a ridge there, and it's sort of moving between the valley, and the camera will be sort of tracking between the valley, and that will look cool. So to do that, let's go to the hypershade, and in the hypershade I want to get some 3D textures, and I'm using the crater node for this. So I double click on the crater node. This will be our displacement, and we're going to be displacing based on the luminance values. So obviously we don't want red, green, blue, we want white, grey and black. And then we need to tell Maya that we're using, that the alpha is the luminance. So our brightness values are how high to displace. And once we have that, let's plug that into a MIA material X passes, and let's plug that into the diffuse. So I'll just move this over here, plug that into the diffuse, and for now let's turn off the reflectivity so it renders quicker, and let's put this on our geometry. Now we can see it. We can see it better if we go viewport 2.0. Makes it a lot clearer, and in this MIA material X passes, let's go to the place 3D texture node and let's scale it up. So the scale is really important. We don't want it so big like this because you actually lose a lot of detail, but we don't want it so small that it's like that. You want a happy medium in between. So I'm going to scale it up to here and see how I go with that. The reason you don't want it too small is because it sort of looks like it's repeating. So this is pretty good here. We can definitely play with the scale as we go. Now the problem is we currently have hills where the character is walking. We don't have a hill just here and a hill just there. We've got hills everywhere, and that's a big problem. And you could separate this up, have one here, one there, and try and tediously go through with the place 3D texture node and find an area where there's just like a straight line of white. I've done that before and it's really annoying and really hard to get right. So an easy way would just be to get a general look and then multiply this by a ramp to sort of eliminate or get rid of the white in the middle and on the sides. So let's do that now. Let's grab under 2D textures, we want this ramp here, and let's move it over and actually plug it into the diffuse so I can see what we're doing here. And instead of these colors, let's change this to black, white and black. Now we don't actually need to change, we don't need to tell my alpha is luminance in here because we'll be multiplying. So now we need to rotate this, so I'm going to go U ramp, and I want to make this smooth because I don't really like this harsh edge that we get there in the linear. Now this is okay, but it's sort of the wrong way around. But the reason I want white in the middle is because I want two ridges, so that will be the left ridge, and then we can just add colors here, add two more black colors, and then add another white color in here. I'll just make sure that's 100% white, nearly. Okay, so I'll just quickly tweak these a little. So the reason I want black on the edges is just so if we didn't have that, the displacement would sort of be cutting off on the edges, and you can sometimes tell in the render cam when that's happening. So putting black on the edges fixes that. So now let's multiply this by our displacement and then actually plug it into our displacement. So let's just grab under utilities a multiply divide node, and what we want is, let's go to other and grab the out alpha into input 1. I'll just put it into the x. We don't need x, y, z because they're all the same. I'll just do the same here. So this one will be input 2 from the out alpha. Now we need to expand our graph network, so I'll click on our MIA material and show input and output connections. Then I'll select ramp 1 and do the same, and then the multiply divide and do the same. And I'll actually plug this multiply divide into the diffuse of the MIA material, and although we won't be able to see it, that's just so that we have this multiply divide node attached to this group. So now if we graph this, we get to see all of that. So I'm going to graph input output, and then we can plug the multiply divide node into the displacement. And once all that's hooked up, I can now take this MIA material and plug the crater back into the color. And now if we just click on the MIA material and graph that, we get to see everything. Okay, with that done, I'll go to Maya and grab a starting displacement node. And once we have that, we can plug the multiply divide node into the displacement, and that would be the output x into the displacement. And then we can plug that displacement into here. So I'll just delete this connection, and then regraph. And we actually have a multiplier here, or you can individually go into each of the crater nodes or ramps or whatever and change the gain. So that's a way to change it independently of each other. But just for now, I'll just increase the scale and take a render. Okay, that's what we're getting. That's interesting. So we'll pick this up in the next lesson and continue to refine this displacement, the textures, and also the quality of the actual displacement. In this lesson we'll be refining our displacement maps to improve our moon terrain. So this is where we left off in the last lesson, but I think one of the most important things is actually the position of this. We can't really know whether these hills are too far apart or too close until we actually render it from the render camera. So let's go into the render camera and take a render at frame 1 and see, actually maybe around the middle where we can actually see the astronaut. Now I want the cliffs to be, well, the ridges to be fairly close, but certainly enough gap for the astronaut to comfortably walk through. So that's certainly a comfortable distance. The only thing I don't really like is that maybe it's too far away, so the only rocks we see are all the way at the end. So I'm going to maybe move the ramp in a bit. If I just hit spacebar, I can tweak it in the perspective and then just come back. So I'll just change this one to viewport 2.0. And under Hypershade, let's plug the ramp into the diffuse and then tweak the ramp settings. So I wanted these in a bit, so let's move these in. And maybe the white can come in as well. Now if I go into the top view and go 2.0, maybe just turn on this. Sort of looks like the it's offside a little, so let's move this one over and then this one over. So now it's in the middle. And let's save this and take another. Okay, that's interesting. What we could actually do is just have one here, and then that way we'd have less hassle. And I'm going to move this one over so that we sort of have a more gradual fade. And let's see, let's save this and take another. It sort of looks a bit odd having all these peaks here. It looks very unnatural. It looks a little better over here. if we go back to the hypershade and plug the crater back into our MO material, let's see what's going on. So the scale is probably a little too small, it's repeating a little too much, so under hypershade, let's grab the place 3D texture node and scale it. And let's save and take a render. Okay, that's interesting, although it's certainly a very gradual, these don't really look like ridges anymore, it's too shallow. I want them to fall off quicker, so let's do that. Under the hypershade, plug the noise back in, and under the plug the ramp back in, and under the ramp settings, it would be best to add the other black one in and bring these out. And then what I'd like to do is add some noise. Not much, just a very small amount, just to sort of break it up, because otherwise it was just too perfect. So that looks good. And let's compare these. The only thing is that they're now too far apart, so I'll bring these in a bit. Now looking at this, I'd sort of like this one to be over a little bit, and this one just looks ugly, so let's change what we're getting there. So plug the crater into the diffuse, and let's grab the place 3D texture node. Let's just see what is causing that. That is what we were getting there, so we don't really like that. Well, I don't like it. So I'm just going to move this. Let's just try something completely different. And you can also go up and down to get something totally new. So I'm going to try my luck with this and just take a render. You just see the difference changing the position of the node, the place 3D texture node makes. So we get a totally different environment. Now I don't think we're getting enough white around, like close to the camera. It's sort of, it's all back here. So I'm going to go hypershade, grab that node, and the more I increase the size, the easier it is to fill the screen with white, but just be careful because you can end up losing detail by scaling up too much. You don't really lose detail, it just sort of looks less interesting. So that's sort of what I mean by less detail. It's scaled in more, we get less variation. So I sort of like the look, but that was zoomed in too far, so let's zoom it out a little. I'd like to zoom it out just a little bit more. Okay, this is what we're getting. Let's move on for now. A way we can sort of add more variation to the general look that we have is just by layering or adding a second crater node, and we can either add or subtract that from our current one. So I'll just click on our original crater and go Edit, Duplicate, Shading Network, and with this crater here, I'll quickly plug this one into the diffuse, and I sort of want a very subtle change, or very subtle look. And I sort of want just a bit more variation in the general displacement, so I'll just change it and then move it down, just give it variation. And then what we'll do is we'll sort of lower its influence by going into the alpha gain and typing in 0.2 just for starters. And then to add this with the multiply, I'm just going to go utilities and get the plus minus average, and then I'd like to grab the crater node and go other, and we'll be taking the out alpha to the input 1D, and it's only actually got one slot, unfortunately. You can add as many slots as you like in the 2 and 3D, but we'll have to just quickly connect this with a little bit of mel, and it's simply connect attribute, and it would be the multiply divide, so it's multiply divide 1 dot output x, and we're wanting to connect this with the plus minus average 1 dot input 1D, and it's the first slot. So in the hypershade, these are now connected, and currently sum, and that's what we want. That's good. Let's just delete this connection here and then plug the plus minus average into the displacement. So it's always good to have saved your original render to see the difference this one node adding 0.2 of its alpha will make. So just generally, I think we're getting more variation in the shape here. That might have pushed up the displacement a little tall, but we can change that later on if we need to. So I'm just going to change the color to just a sort of neutral gray so we can have an easier time seeing what's going on. So I'll just connect this here. Actually, white is good, and I'll re-render that. Okay, that's much easier to see what's going on here. So let's quickly address the problem that we were having. Well, not really a problem, but the character sort of starts a lot higher than he ends. So the first frame we can sort of see him, the ground plane is sort of, up to his chest, but at the very end, it's at the right place. So the way we have to get around that is to rotate it. So before we do that, I'm just going to click on this plane and go to the outliner, and let's call this our ridge geo. And to avoid messing up our textures when we rotate, if we just put these inside our ridge, we can now rotate with these textures rotating in tandem. So it's currently good where it is here, but it's way too tall here, so we'll move it down and rotate it up. So when do we first see the guy? We see him around here, and it looks about the right height, and it's sort of around the right height. It's too low at the moment here. I'll rotate a little more. Now that's actually sort of odd because the camera itself actually craned down. I might go to the outliner, and under the world transform, rotate this down. Starts sort of looking almost straight ahead, but sort of down a little bit, and then the camera moves down, and that's more accurate. And this way we can, instead of having to tilt down, we can tilt this up. So that's where the dude starts, the tip of his head, so maybe it's a little tall here. I'll move down a bit. That looks about right, and at the end, that looks about right. And in the next lesson, we'll continue tweaking our displacement maps. In this lesson, we'll continue refining our displacement maps and our texture nodes. What I think I'll do is push this back in Z, and then also make the fall off a bit more sudden. To do that, let's just grab our geometry and translate Z. Let's push this back, and we're not really getting anywhere, so let's try 5 or 7. And then I'll go hypershade and find our ramp, plug that into the diffuse, and then in the perspective view we'll be able to tweak this. So we want it to fall off sooner, so under the attribute editor, we'll move these in a bit. Okay, let's try this. It's a little bit bland, so what I'm going to do is grab this crater here and plug that into the diffuse, and instead of just lowering its contribution, I'm going to change the brightness and darken it, and then increase the contribution. Let's see what we get here. So by moving the white back, I've sort of gotten a much more gradual fade in. I think I might do the same here, and then just generally increase the displacement. I can either do that in the displacement node, so I think I will, because that will scale everything. Let's save this picture and take another. So to get this render here, what I did was simply really scale down this crater here. If I plug this into the diffuse, I've scaled it right down, so it's quite small, getting lots of nice detail. And then I've drastically reduced its influence by lowering the alpha gain. Now one problem we're having, and the reason that these look so ugly, is because they're being cut off. This is the very edge of the screen here, and that's why we're getting such an odd, sharp looking edge. So what we need to do is fade that off as well, and we can just do that with another ramp, which will be the one that cuts it off at the edge. So let's go under 2D textures ramp, or we can just duplicate the original. That's what I'll do. I'll go edit, duplicate shading network, and this one, just quickly plug this one into the diffuse. We can get rid of most of its colors. I just need one black and one white one left. And let's see what that's giving us. Let's make this a V ramp. Currently, that's on the wrong side, so let's drag the black down here. Then drag the white forward. Okay, cool. So let's see what we get with this. We'll just have to multiply this one though. So under my utilities, let's grab a multiply divide node, and this will be between this one and this one. So we can delete this here, and we can multiply this here by this here, and the output will be the displacement. So let's go output 1D to the displacement. So I'm just going to move the time slider back a bit just so we can see a bit further. And there we have a much more natural fall off. We don't have those absurd jagged edges at the end. It seems we do have some. That's a little hard to see considering we have the black. I'm just going to create a light, and this will actually be the final light that we use. So if we go into our channel box editor and unreference the astronaut card, I'm just going to click on him here, and under attribute editor, let's go to the Lambert and let's delete this transparency for the moment, and I can see where the light is. It's coming from there. So I'll put the transparency back, and I'm going to cheat it a little bit and move the light up a tiny bit. But generally it'll be in the same position. We want it sort of where this locator is. In perspective view, let's go create light spotlight. And we are the spotlight at the moment. It's sort of this tracking marker there, or the locator. I want to zoom it out far enough so that I can see the entire area, and I'm just wanting to move it over sort of where that tracking marker would be, and cheating it up a little bit. Okay, something like that. And let's take a render of this. Actually, before I do, I'm just going to turn on ray trace shadows. So now that we have a light, let's go into the render settings and disable the default light. And I want to turn on final gather. Let's just lower the accuracy so it happens a bit quicker. And also under the hypershade, let's change our diffuse to something that we can actually see. This grey colour here. And I'll go back a little in time and let's render. Okay, that's a little dark, so let's increase the diffuse, double the intensity of the spotlight, and let's pump up the final gather to 2. I sort of don't really like these peaks. I sort of like them to be a bit flatter at the top. To do that, let's go into the hypershade, and our original crater, this one here, will help us achieve that. In here, I'm just going to decrease the height of channel 1, push channel 2 up. And what we're seeing here is this side is very bright, but this side is quite dark. So that's the final gather that's lighting this, and that's obviously receiving the spotlight. So I think I'd like a bit more of both. Let's increase this to 3 and then increase the spotlight to 2.5. Now we're getting these ultra smooth areas, but don't worry about those, they won't look so smooth in or when it has an actual texture. And I forgot to save the original one of the one before this, but I think I might have gone a little overboard on the ramp. This was originally white and that was grey, so I'm going to bring this to about here. And I'm just going to render from a different part just to see what we're getting. So what I don't like about this render is the fact that this is so high and the astronaut is so low. So I'm going to rotate the plane again. So in the perspective view, let's go back to perspective. I want this to be, and this is the group I believe, we'll just make sure you have the group because it's got our textures inside. I want this to be more rotated down. It may need to be brought up, but let's just quickly compare. It's probably cutting into the astronaut a little here. I'll move this down in Y. Oops. And let's just see at the start. Can't see him, but yeah, that's about appropriate. And at the end, it's a little low. So bring it up. And that should be fine. Let's take a render at about halfway. Here we're getting a bit intense, so I'll probably have to turn the spotlight down. On this side, it looks really boring. I think I'm going to change the ramp to change this in the hypershade. Let's drag the ramp onto the diffuse, and there's the perspective view, here we are. I want a tighter transition, but just on the left side. So I think it's this one here. Let's try that. And we're sort of getting those jagged edges there, so let's see what's going on with that. Well, that looks horrid, so I'm going to undo that and actually let's put it back here. And let's see what that looks like, and if that doesn't look good we can change the actual crater. Well, that's interesting, but it's very low at the moment in comparison to this one. Add another white and bring this in. And just make sure that it's white. So this is what we're getting at frame 1, or close to the start, frame 6. I'm just going to quickly fiddle with the crater again. Just get it just right. I thought we weren't really getting enough variation. So those are the dark areas over here is why that side looking a little bit bland. So let's try this. Save and render. So that was before, and this is what changing the position did. What a difference. I don't know which one I like better though. I think I like that one better. So I'm going to go back and play with it a little bit. Probably just pause it and resume when I'm happy with what it looks like. Alright, here's the new result. This is the very start, middle, and end. So, looking pretty good. And the only thing I've changed is in the hypershade. Let's bring this up. I've added an additional crater here, and it's almost 100% white, though it has a little bit of black. And that's being multiplied by the previous result, and that's being plugged into the displacement. I've also made some slight manipulations to the ramp and our original crater. So the thing we're getting here is it's super bright over here, but not too bright over there. So I'm going to turn down the spotlight, and let's just go outliner. We probably won't know exactly how much we want it until we have the actual material, but I'll just set it to 1.5 and also maybe just lower the indirect lighting a little bit, the final gather. And let's take a render, and then once we get this basically right, then we can make some adjustments to the quality of the displacement, which is actually pretty good at the moment. And the reason for that is just because we started with so much geometry on our mesh. Okay, cool. In the next lesson, we'll begin tweaking the quality of our displacement map. In this lesson, we'll tweak the quality of our displacement and continue setting up our scene. So here's where we left off. It's a 23-second render, and it actually looks quite nice. So I thought I'd just go over some of these settings if you need to change your quality. So that would be in the mesh itself, under the geo shape and the displacement map. So currently, this here is the Bombad general settings. This pretty much controls the displacement quality. So it's defaulted to 6, and that actually looks really great for us because of the amount of geometry we have. But if you had not much geometry, then that might not look so good. If we lowered this to 0, we'd still get pretty much the exact same look. I'll just save this here, because we have so much geometry to start with. Even a value of 0 will look good. And we can also increase this if we want, which I probably won't do for the moment, but when it comes to render time, we might want to bump the amount of samples up, and that'll just get us more geometry in the scene. So that was with 0, and that was with 6, and pretty much the only thing we can see is this final gather bumping around, but there is a very slight difference in the amount of samples. So for render time, we might want to bump this up to 50 or 100 or 200. It's quite hard to tell what's going to be a good sample rate, but it appears to not be exponential, so don't be afraid to try high values like 50 or 100. Let's just try that now. Let's go 100 and see what we're getting in comparison to this 23-second render. So this is what we get. It's slightly longer, it's 30 seconds as opposed to 23. And the places you'll notice it the most are areas where we have all this detail here, like in these ridges here. So let's just swap between the two. We can definitely see a lot more quality in these areas. So that's looking really good. I might just set it back to 6 while we're still tweaking things, but definitely bump it up to 100 or even higher for the final render. Okay, so let's set this displacement just back to 0. That gives us a pretty nice quality render, but without the additional render time. So I think now what we need is maybe a little bit more light along the edges here. We're relying heavily on final gather, and that's why we're getting this insane flicker. So let's go to perspective view. I'm going to go create lights, area light, and Let's scale this up. I'm going to push it back so it's sort of below or about the same as the as our displacement geometry. I'll make it just about the same width as well. So let's see what this does. It's probably a little bright. Let's take it to 0.5. So this is what we had before, and this is what we have now. And I'm liking it, although we are adding a little bit to this bit here. So I'm just going to try and angle it away from there just a tad. Push it back a bit. Let's save and I'll save the most recent render and take another. Okay, so not much change here. What I'll do is just lower it a little bit and call it done. So now let's actually add a texture to this moon surface. It looks pretty good as is, but we have a few areas that are definitely a little bit flat without a texture. So what I'm going to do is open up Photoshop. I have a texture that I downloaded and I've tiled it very large. So I'm just going to scale it down to 4K. Let's just go image size. Put to 496, and this is what we have. So it's just a dirt texture. I sort of thought that these little, I'm not sure what they are, these little indents, they sort of look like moon craters, where the asteroids or whatever hits the moon. That's sort of what the moon surface looks like. What I'm going to do is double click on the layer to unlock it, and Control-Shift-U to desaturate, to get rid of all that colour. And what I'm going to do is Control-I, which is invert. And I think that gives a more interesting look. So the craters that were sort of depressed are now popping up a little. And I think this is going to generate a nicer spec map. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and save this out as the diffuse. Just save it, no compression, and these are all good. So now let's quickly create a spec map from this. Let's create a levels adjustment layer. And just gamma it up, or gamma it down rather, and sort of tone it down a little. Something like that. That's cool. That's quite interesting. So I'll save as spec. Well, good. Alright, back to Maya. So back in Maya, in the hypershade, let's grab our MIA Material X and graph it up. And let's add some file nodes under Maya. File, and just rearrange these. So file 3 can be attribute editor. This one can be the spec. And let's just grab our file. And I'll just quickly change the filter to 0.1. And then we want this file here to be the diffuse. 0.1 filter, and let's grab the image. Cool, so let's plug these in. So diffuse here and reflectivity or specular here. I'm going to leave the reflectivity at 1 just for now, although it's probably going to be a little high. And let's take a render from the render camp, frame 0, frame 1. So it's a little darker than we had it before, so let's go back into the hypershade, and firstly I just want to lower the spec amount a bit because it's quite a lot, so maybe 0.6 Lewis, and I do want it completely glossy. Now for the actual brightness, we could either change the texture back in Photoshop or increase our lighting. So I'm just going to increase this to 0.7, maybe bring this up a bit, just a little bit taller, and then make it to 3 and bump up the final gather. Let's take this to 3. Let's take a render of that. Let's just save this. Okay, that looks very nice. It's very interesting. So I think leave that there for now, and maybe create the larger mountain. It's pretty much the exact same process that we just went through, so I won't worry about recording it. Just use the techniques and the craters and layering craters on top of one another to generate a background cliff or something like that that can add some additional parallax to the scene. Here's where I'm up to. I've added the mountain in the background. I've also added a few lights. Let's have a look at some of those. Many of them are quite minor, but I thought it was worth mentioning. I have another directional light here just to cast a little bit of light specifically on this area here. The reason I couldn't just increase the traditional spotlight, which is lighting most of this, is because it got too hot on this side and left this side a little dark. Pretty much the only thing that's lighting here is Final Gather, and increasing that light unfortunately blew this one out. That's why I've added this directional light in here. I've also had to add a area light to illuminate some of this mountain back here. It was practically pitch black without that. It's pretty subtle. Intensity of 0.15, but it is very large to cover the entire area. Also, I've had to add a second spotlight, which I tried to aim just on the mountain, or the background rather, and this is at 0.5, not casting any shadows because the shadows looked really odd combining with the other shadows. I believe I have an example here where we can see the two shadows meeting. It just looks odd. Something worth mentioning is if we have a look at these two similar renders, you can see I've just extended this a little, but the main thing is that's how much difference we're getting in Final Gather between two frames. We're probably going to have to, well, either we could up the settings enormously, that would blow out the render time. A better or more efficient way of doing this would be to freeze the Final Gather. Let's do that now. Actually, let's work on the render settings. Let's go from start. Let's go through all the tabs. In the comment tab, we'll call this this is shot 1, and then it can be the insert the layer name and then the render pass name. And we'll be using a TIFF, either a TIFF or an EXR is fine. And for the name.number.extension and 1 to 171, I think. We may not actually be using all these frames, but I just want to have them rendered so I can choose to edit it later. And render cam is good, 720, just because the videos get uploaded to digital tutors at 720, so no point going higher at the moment. And let's get rid of the default light. Then under passes, let's add in the camera depth. Let's add in diffuse, indirect, reflection, and spec. That should be good. And let's associate these passes to this render layer, which is master layer, which we normally don't render on, but it'll be fine for this. And features, these are good. Under quality, was set to adaptive sampling. That's what you get from the production preset. If you're feeling a bit rich, we can go to 3. I'll just leave it at 2 for now. And this Mitchell filter, I think it defaults to the triangle, of course, but I think this looks a lot better when using displacement maps. I think it makes it look a lot sharper and doesn't add much render time at all. Under frame buffer, we should change this to RGBA float 4 by 32 bits, and that'll just give us some extra latitude when we're compositing later on. Now under indirect lighting, we have these Final Gather settings very low, and to reduce that flicker we would have to set these very, very high. So high that it's just going to blow the render time out completely. So the efficient thing to do would be to get a decent quality final gather and freeze it. And to do that, we can increase the accuracy to maybe 250 and 15. And under the final gather map, let's set rebuild on and enable the map visualizer, and that will just help us see the final gather points that it generates. Now under features, we want to change the render mode from normal to final gathering only. Now at frame 1, if we hit render, this will generate just the final gather. This is what we get. It's blank in here, but it took a minute and 2 seconds. We can see what we actually rendered if we go into the view and change the renderer to the default quality rendering. Here's the final gather map. And that looks good, but if we go forward in time, we'll start to see gaps, especially here. These were parts that the camera didn't get to cast final gather rays onto. To fix that, we can add additional points to the final gather map every 40 odd frames. And to do that, we go into the render settings. On the indirect lighting, instead of rebuild on, which will discard all information and add new final gather points, we can set this to off. I'll move a bit forward in time so we can see more of these gaps, particularly along the ridge here and in here. Now if we render again, that should fill in those gaps, and we can continue doing that along the timeline until there are no more gaps. 1 minute and 32 seconds later, we should have those gaps filled in, and yes we do. Let's move forward and we can see some more gaps. I can't really move too far forward because I might skip some of the areas such as this bit here which really need filling. What you can do is if we go into the camera settings, we can extend this camera out so that it will cast rays into those areas. And to do that, we can change the lens squeeze ratio to 1.1, and that will increase the size that it'll cast its rays into. And that should be good. I'll just deselect the camera so I can see. I'll generate more in frame 80 and then maybe can take some larger steps forward. Okay, that should be enough final gather points for now. I'll just set the camera back to its original scan size or squeeze ratio, and it looks like we've got everything covered here. Now if we come back into the render settings, we can change the rebuild from off to freeze, and that won't generate any more points, saving us a lot of time. And under features, let's change this back to normal, and I think I might actually bump the quality up to 3. So that represents quite a significant increase in render time, but I think we're going to need it. And I'll show you the reason for that in just a minute. Because we have our final gather points now, we can render and it won't have to calculate those at the start of the render, it can get straight into it. And that's what we get. Not too bad for a 960 by 540 render. We get to the final gather for free, but we're increasing the samples, and the reason for that is if we go file load render pass, and if we go into something like the specular, it's just loaded in here, what I want is a minimal amount of flickering, because I want to take this when compositing and sort of blur it a little bit and expand it, and even a small amount of flicker in the pass, the specular pass, will make that either impossible or it'll have to be toned down because the flickering will be too great. An easy way to reduce flicker without increasing our samples greatly is if we come into our material down to the reflection settings and change the reflectivity from completely mirror, which is glossiness set to 1, and we make them all the way down to 0, which is completely diffuse, or you could go a happy medium in between. With these set to 0, you can get away with low or medium samples such as 1 or 2 and have almost no flicker at all. If you're having true mirror reflections, you might even have 4 or 5 samples and still be getting flicker. So just for the sake of getting this done, I'm going to turn my glossiness all the way to 0, and that'll still give us a nice specular result, but no flicker. When you hear me in the later lessons complaining about all the specular flicker, you won't need to worry, because if you've set your glossiness to 0, you won't have any flicker. And also the images that I'll be providing in the download, they won't have any flicker because they will also be set to 0 glossiness. Let's just quickly check our other render passes, mainly the depth pass. I sometimes have trouble with those, but it looks like it's working very nicely here. You can remap it to include the rest of the mountains, because we currently don't get the mountains. It's too far away. So to do that, we can, if we go to render settings, passes, and in the double click on the depth, we can remap the depth values, and let's just see how far away might this be. To check, I'm just going to click on a light which is certainly further away and go display, heads up display, object details, and that's 1000 units away from the camera. If we have a look at the top view, we can see that's certainly a lot further than we need to be. This one here is 800 units away. So if we go to the render settings, depth settings, I'm going to set the far clipping plane to 600, and that should give us all of the mountain as well. One of the last things we'll need to do before we render is get rid of this astronaut card and put him on his own render layer. We'll need to render him out because he moves with the camera, and also we'll need his depth data if we want to apply the depth blur to him as well as the background. So I'm going to turn him off in this layer here, but if we click on the mask layer, I'm going to go Layer, Create Empty Layer, and this will be our character layer. And in this layer, I'm going to select our character. He's under World Transform, Static Cam, Astronaut Card, and I'll add selected objects. Now, sorry, he's actually turned off, but we'll make him visible. And in master layer, he's currently turned on. So if we, in master layer, select him and Control H, we can go to the character layer and Shift H him. So now he's not in the master layer, he's in the character layer only. And we'll turn the render for that back on. Now to render this, we're going to need the render pass, the depth pass, but we don't need any of the other passes, so we don't need to have any of these except for depth. And once that's done, let's select the layer, which we can't do because it's a reference, and let's just check to make sure that this is being rendered properly. So on frame 65, let's take a render. So we can see that he's being affected by the lights. We'll need to fix that. Under render stats, let's turn off cast shadows and receive shadows. Also in the render settings, we can turn off ray tracing. And let's actually create a layer override for that, because we'll certainly need ray tracing in the other layer. Now let's just check out the material that we were using for this. This is a Lambert. Currently the ambient color is set to black. Let's push that to white, and it looks blown out here, but it should be all good in the render view. Alright, this is what we get. Let's quickly check our render pass depth. And this is what it looks like, because it doesn't respect the alpha, the transparency of the Lambert. But this is the solid color, and that's what depth it is. And we can just multiply that by the alpha of the character layer. So that's all good. Our character layer is also set up, and our master layer is set up. We're good to render. So down to rendering, render, batch render. And just make sure to set all your threads. And I'll see you in the next lesson where we'll be compositing this together. In this lesson, we're going to composite all the images that we rendered out of Maya in the previous lesson. I'm in After Effects at the moment, and I'm going to go File, Scripts, and let's choose the Smart Import, and that's just a quick way of doing things. And here is the entire images folder, and under that I've made one for shot 1. And under shot 1 is all the folders and render passes. I'll import that, and here we have all our passes, and create a new folder for those and call this shot 1 renders, and put those in there. Let's start with the Master Beauty and put that into a new comp. Even though we probably won't be using this, just nice to see what the animation or the render looks like. Currently it looks a little washed out. If we change the render settings, or project settings rather, to 32 bits per channel, and then we go into each of these under Interpret Footage Main. Under Color Management, Interpret Linear Light is currently, I think it defaults to on for 32-bit images. We'll need to change or turn that off on each one. Once that's done, you'll notice that our our beauty layer looks a lot nicer than it was before because it's not being interpreted incorrectly. I'm just going to take a RAM preview of this and see what we have. Very cool. Alrighty, let's get cracking. We don't need this beauty, but I've just got it there for reference. I'll turn that one off. Let's grab the diffuse, and if you don't see anything, it's probably because of the way the EXRs have been rendered out. So let's just add the extractor effect. And if you just click in here, it should load up the channels for us. And then we have our diffuse channel, or diffuse render layer. We'll need to add the indirect layer. And that will be either screened or added on top, depending on if you want the high dynamic range values. So I'm going to add on that. And we also have the reflection and the spec. Let's see how much we actually have in the reflection, because we may not actually need it. I can't really see much, but if we change the exposure, we should be able to see something. So I'll put it on here for now. Maybe I'll set this one to screen and this one to screen as well, just to tone it down a little. So we're yet to put the specular in. Where's the specular? Here it is. Okay, here's the spec. Now this can be set to screen or add. Let's see how we're doing with flickering. This was a 3 sample set to 3, and we are getting quite a bit of flicker. What I wanted to do with this was to expand it out and sort of glow it a little bit. Now, if there's too much flickering, what I might do is you just have this as a proxy and then render it out with additional samples, maybe 4 samples, which will take a while, but these weren't too long. And just composite this as a proxy, and then for our final render there'll be a lot less flicker. Let's add the glow anyway and see what we can get. That's sort of what I'm going for. I'll tweak these a little bit. The threshold determines how much is actually being glowed, so we can glow everything or just only the brightest values at 100. And for some odd reason it actually dips between 100 and 80. I might go around 80 and increase the radius. Well, that's a bit much. Also the intensity matters, and setting this to either screen or add can matter as well. You can bump this up or make it more subtle. I think this is good. It's you don't notice it too much, but it's there and it's giving a nice result. I'm not sure where else this is affecting. It's just solo this. It's mainly on the mount at the back. I don't really think we have much of this at all in the foreground, but that's fine. So it would probably blow out here anyway, considering these rocks are already quite light. I'll bump it up just a bit, We can do that by increasing the threshold, funny enough. And that's good for now. We can always tweak these later. Okay, we've done the basic compositing of our render layers. Let's put this in a main composition. So go composition, new composition, and call this one shot 1, 1280 by 720 at 25 frames a second. Then we can put our CG in here. I'll just hit O to get to the end to cap it off, and trim comp to work area. Now, let's just call this the CG passes, and put that into a folder called pre-comps. Let's just check, because we had 3 layers alpha matting on top of each other. Let's check that the alpha is clean, which it probably won't be. If we add in a red solid and go 1280, 720, that on the bottom. Oh, we don't even have any alpha, so we'll need to alpha matte that. I'm just going to use the master beauty for this, and this can alpha matte. And then we have a nice alpha. Now for the background, this is in space, and this is supposed to be set on the moon. I think it would be really nice to have some interesting imagery and some stars, things like that. This is the picture we'll be using, and it may look familiar to some people because I believe Apple has a modified or a shopped version as their desktop wallpaper on Mountain Lion. And just download that from Google. Okay, here we have it, and I'll put this behind the CG. It's very large. We'll be scaling this right down. I sort of wanted this to be the light source that is illuminating the astronaut's helmet. We had a spotlight representing this inside of Maya. It could either be the sun or a galaxy, just something really bright to sort of illuminate the scene. Now I want to flop this, I think it would look better the other way. Something like that. Except I don't really want it on that extreme an angle. I'll rotate it a bit. Something like this. It's sort of straight, but sort of not. Also, we won't be able to just have this cut off like that. If we add a motion tile, we can extend the image, and hopefully we'll be able to get away if we mirror edge and output 150, 150. Although that does look a little suspicious there. And so a way to fix that is just to scale it up a bit, and that way we can have less of that. And I might rotate it as well, Shift R. Maybe something like this. Something that will be handy to us at the moment would be to find out where the astronaut is and where we can crop the 235, and that will help us rearrange where the Andromeda Galaxy needs to be. If we grab the character master beauty and just solo it, we can find out exactly where we'd need to cut. We can't use any more than the highest point at which it cuts off, which I believe is somewhere around here. Let's just save this frame as a comparison. Don't believe if he cuts off any higher than that. Potentially here. Actually, it was probably this frame here, somewhere around here. And what I'll do is just create a 235 composition. We'll call this shot 1, 235. And this will be, I'm actually not sure what it is. I just know what it is in 1920. It's 1920 by 815, or 816 rather. And I can put that to 1280. It appears it is 1280 by 544 pixels. I'm going to come in here and create a red solid and call this the, well, this will be the area that we can have our character. And then shot 1, let's paste that, bring it down to here. That's as low as we can go. And that's sort of where I would like the composition to be cropped at. What we can do is add another solid. This time the solid will be the full size, and this can be called letterbox. And and I'd like this one to be black. And this one can alpha invert rather, this here. And if we stop soloing these, we can see the 2, 3, 5. Now it doesn't have to be like this, we can rearrange it, but I just didn't want to cut off any more of the astronaut or the bottom than was required. Now I'm not really a big fan of the composition of this. I think I'll put the area up a little bit and see a bit more of the sky and a bit less of the astronaut, something like that. And you'll notice that the Andromeda isn't moving at all. What we need to do is go back into Maya and export the camera. And I think we'll do that and continue the compositing in the next lesson. Here's where we left off in the last lesson. We'd sort of composed our scene, but the Andromeda Galaxy isn't moving. So to fix that, what we'll need to do is go into Maya and export our camera again. Back in Maya, if we open our outliner and go into the world transform, on the camera group, we remember that we'd keyframed the render cam based on the animation of the camera group, which starts at 1 and ends at 171. So that's the reason we can't just export our PF-track camera as an After Effects file, because it will be slightly different. If we go to the render cam, this has all the data from PF-track, and this was our animation inside of Maya. An easy way to export this is with the Sunday plugin. I think it's a plugin. If you don't have it, get it, because it's awesome and it's free, and it just essentially takes all the hassle out of exporting cameras from Maya to After Effects. This is the window that we get. We have some options here, and the main advantage of this is that it makes a copy of your camera and then exports it. Normally you have to bake out all the data first, which means it's much harder to edit if you need to change the camera moves, but with the Sunday plugins you won't need to do that. You'll be able to keep all your original data. Now it doesn't matter too much here because PF-track already exports the baked camera, but for something like the camera group it won't have to bake this. We'll get to keep our original keyframes. I've just put it in the root folder and I'll export that, and it'll just go through every frame that we have and export it. Note that our Maya project actually starts at frame 1. I think I'll just quickly change that in After Effects just to have some consistency. If you just start it at frame 1, that'll keep the same frame numbers. Maya has finished rendering this camera, so what I'll do is probably just put it into the I'll put it in the assets folder, even though that's not where it should go, but we just needed a folder for it and that one was empty. And we can double click on that. Actually, I'll put that in the pre-comps. And this here is our camera shape. Copy that, paste it into After Effects, or our Shot 1 composition, and we can now make Andromeda a 3D layer, and it will play along with our camera movement. And it's very big. Let's shift it back in Z. Because this is a faraway galaxy, I'm guessing this is a very long way away. I'll just do a random arbitrary number, let's say -6,000. That's far away enough that it's sort of in infinity. The perspective won't change, but the X and Y will, and that'll correspond with our camera. Now we can just move it across. I like to drag it with my mouse instead of using the axes because it's quicker this way. I find these to be a bit slower the further you push them away. You can actually hold down Shift and move them, and it moves them further, but this is just easier. Now let's just check the transform. I do have a flop here, although it seems to be going the other way now. I'll turn that off and Shift R for rotation. Let's rotate it. Actually, we need to turn that back on, and I want it like this. except much larger. So Shift S and scale it up. Somewhere around here, but larger. And maybe a bit more rotation. And even bigger. Something like this might do. Maybe it's a little big. I'm just trying to avoid this area here, although we can mask that off anyway. I don't really like the composition. If we just quickly preview this, we'll see the absurd flicker that we're getting from here, which we won't be able to have. I'll probably be rendering this again, and I might just lower this down so that we can see more of the Andromeda Galaxy when I do that. Let's just make the best of what we have for now. I'll put this here, maybe scale it down a bit more, and let's have a quick preview of what we're getting with this camera. Actually, I'll zoom into 100% so we can see. And the position probably did move a little bit because I was twiddling it around in well, like this. It actually can change the Z position, but not much at all. So let's see what we're getting here at 100%. That's nice. We're getting X and Y, no perspective change. We could probably send it back a little further, but won't make much of a difference at all. Also, what I'm noticing is that these areas don't look very bright considering they're being illuminated by this galaxy. To fix that, let's go into the CG. When I'm rendering it, I might turn the lights up, but another way to do this would be to add a adjustment layer and levels. We can brighten this up, but I don't want to brighten everything up because we're getting blown out everywhere. Just the tops, and feather that. Just want the very tips being illuminated by the galaxy. To get this to move along, just quickly keyframe the mask path. It doesn't seem that it moves much at all. By the end I might just want it to come up a bit and just check the middle frame. It's pretty much exactly right. Yeah, that's good enough. And what I also want is a controlled one that illuminates just the highlights instead of the rest. But let's check. We are getting blown out values here. It's probably the specular? No, it's probably the diffuse that's giving us those. I'm just going to duplicate that. Grab just the tops here. I'm sure I'll copy the same mask from here. Sorry, the adjustment layer. Go to the first frame, copy the mask, paste it, and set this to add. Maybe fast blur it a little. Something like that. Back to shot 1. There we have our nice brighter values. Also, I might just take it out a little on that part. If we go back to CG passes, let's maybe hit G to create a point here and then move this one up a little. And that's actually keyframes, so we'll do it at the end here as well. Okay, that's looking good. We have our astronaut here as well. What I also thought would be cool is to have sort of a bright horizon haze. And to do that, let's just go back to the start here. Create a layer new solid, and I'll make this one sort of white, a little bit blue. And bring this under everything bar the CG. Actually, yeah, it needs to be under the CG. It needs to be on top of the Andromeda, and I want sort of a horizon line like this. Maybe needing to bring these up a little. And feather. Let's go 200. Set this to add. I sort of think this gives us the feel that there's something behind this this mountain or ridge, like there might be a moon base or a city or something. I think it gives more of an atmospheric feel and a larger scale to the scene. Without it, it sort of looks more like like we're on a small object such as an asteroid or something. And let's maybe tone this down a little. I'll bring it down or back a bit. Maybe something like this. Excellent. And in the next lesson, we'll begin adding our stars. In this lesson, we'll be compositing some additional stars into the background. I feel the backdrop is getting a little bit bright, and if we had some stars, we may not see them as much. I'd like to add some more stars to this. What I'll do is tone down the Andromeda Galaxy. Let's add a levels to it, and I'll gamma it down to 0.6, making it nicer, more contrasty, brighter, and but now we actually have some black sky where we can add some stars. Otherwise the stars would sort of get lost in here. And with that, I'd like to add a sharpen, as it looks a little softer than the CG that we have currently, although we do good to add a bit of blur to that, to the CG. As we all know, CG is perfectly clear, and that's not how it is in real life. We add a 40 sharpen, that might be a bit much. Let's go to 20. Now with the CG, let's add a little blur to that. We can do it in here and add a fast blur. And not much at all, maybe 0.5. No, way too much. 0.2. Just to take the super sharpness away from it. Because obviously our live action footage isn't CG quality, it's a little bit blurry, and also it has motion blur. That's something we'll need to add to this CG. We can do that in the CG comp if we double click. Just create a new adjustment layer, Control-Alt-Y. I'll call this one MB for motion blur, and this one is our CC. And let's add real smart motion blur. Whoops. If you don't have RSMB, I guess you can use the CC force motion blur, but RSMB is better and faster. And we probably won't get much motion blur at all, just because the scene moves quite peacefully, but if we turn it off and on, it's definitely getting more blur in the areas that are closer to us. Now, a better way of getting this selective color correction rather than using a mask is if we deleted that mask, maybe got the master beauty, which is here. I believe this is the only one with an alpha channel. If we turn it on, solo it, and Alt-4, or go to the alpha in here, yes, we do have an alpha. We can, whoops, let's go to RGB. We can alpha invert this here, and if we turn it on and off, it's currently not doing anything, but if we add a fast blur to this here, we should be getting a nice rim, and we are. We can see that here. Now what I'd also like to do is light wrap this with the stars, or the background rather, and to do that we'd need to pre-comp it first. So let's go ahead and do that. I need Andromeda and the pale royal blue solid, which will be our horizon. Okay, let's pre-comp the horizon and the Andromeda together. And this new composition is actually going to be quite large. This will actually need the camera as well. We'll call this the background, and this will need to go underneath the CG. In the background we have this. Now this background will go, oh sorry, let me just organize these. First of all, we have shot 1 on the very left, then the CG passes, and the shot 2, 3, 5 can be at the very end. Under CG passes, let's put the well, this is being alpha matted here. This is the CG passes and it's being alpha matted to this. So let's call this pre-comp, this will be CG passes matted, and that will go under the pre-comps, and this will go under the pre-comps also. Now that we have this pre-comped, what we can do is light wrap it with the background. Just zoom into 100% and add the light wrap effect, which is actually a plugin in After Effects, but it's a pretty essential plugin. You need to get this one. And this will be the background layer, and let's see what difference that makes. It's quite nice. It's a little harsh or a little intense at the default, but I would like to set it to add to get the most out of it, and maybe blend it 50%. And that's before and that's after. Nice. Now also in the CG passes, we also had this layer which we used this matte for, and we can do the same trick that we did with the color correction alpha, inverting the beauty, and that's what I'd like to do here. So alpha invert the beauty, and this is now only affecting here, and I'll just create a giant mask to sort of ease it off over here because it was a little intense. So a mask of 50 will help us, and that's what we're getting with that. Okay, now back in here, I think I'd like to bring up the letterbox a little. So to do that, just move the area up a tad. I'm liking this composition a bit better. Now let's add in some stars in our Andromeda galaxy. Do that in the background layer. And just to help me, I'm going to turn the horizon off for a little while. Now let's create a solid for our stars. Layer, new solid, called stars, and I've made it a little bit larger than 1280 by 720, just so we don't go out of bounds when this moves with the camera. And let's add the fractal noise to this. I'll need to scale it right down. That's too big at the moment, but too small and we'll just get blandness. So let's give it some detail, and let's contrast this up and brightness this down. Something like this. If you don't don't turn the brightness down enough, we sort of get to sort of give away that these aren't actually circular and some are very odd shapes. But if we turn the brightness down far enough, we can get away with it, and it's also excellent that the noise isn't all exactly the same size as we would get if we just had the normal noise. And the problem with that is obviously different stars are different or closer or further away, and wouldn't all be exactly the same size. Now let's make this into a 3D layer. You can just 3D this here, and let's change the position to 0, 0, 0. So that's in the very center, and then let's actually move it back to minus 3500. Which isn't as far back as the Andromeda galaxy, but that's just sort of give it a little bit of parallax if there is any. There probably won't be much at all, but just in case. And let's scale this up, and let's set this to add. But one thing to note is, because we have the brightness so far down, we're actually getting negative values here. So I'll need to clamp those, and you can clamp them with either a clamp or any 8-bit effect. So I like to type in arithmetic, and that just clamps them because it's an 8-bit effect. You'll see the little warning button here, and now we can set this to add, and this will play nicely with our background. You'll notice that if we save this, well, we don't really need to, but if you turn the arithmetic off, it's not very nice at all. Now let's mask out where this Andromeda galaxy is, because it's so bright we really wouldn't be able to see these stars here. Just create a very quick mask around the brightest areas, and then M, so that to invert, feather it out, maybe 150, and then MM, and expand it maybe 50 pixels. And let's see the difference that makes. No, and yes. That looks much better. Maybe less expansion. Let's try 0. There, that looks good. Okay, what else do we need to do? Let's turn back on the horizon and let's just see. Let's maybe tone down the stars where the horizon is, because we wouldn't be able to see. Normally as the horizon, towards the horizon you get particles and stuff that obscure the stars, so let's add another mask and set this to subtract, inverted, and then let's feather this out 200. And that allows us to still not get any stars here, but it fades them out where the horizon is. If we turn that off, we can see the difference that makes. Okay, let's check it out in our CG passes, sorry, our shot 1. That looks nice. I might move the mask down a little bit. I'd like to have a bit more stars. Oops, just mask 2 down there and down here. Okay, that looks good, and the only stars we can see are those that are coming from the Andromeda, and I don't really mind them too much. And in the next lesson we'll be putting in our lens flare. It was actually keyed out, it was in the live action footage and we keyed it out, so we'll be replacing that in the next lesson. In this lesson we'll be adding in our lens flare and doing some general tweaks. Before we continue, let's just take a look at where we're up to at this stage. Okay, I've finished RAM previewing. I've just gone full screen by going tilde key, and let's preview. Alright, looking pretty good except for this flicker that's going on here, but that was just me being silly, having my glossy reflection set to 1. But everything else looks fine, so let's continue on. I think I'll color correct the astronaut. Let's get some levels going here, and this would be on beauty. I'll just call this our live action. And for the gamma, let's gamma this down. Let's try 0.6, maybe increase the brightness a little, maybe 0.7. And let's go 0.8. 0.75. And let's see how that looks in the different parts on the timeline. I think that suits here. Yeah, he's a little darker than this side, but he's about the same darkness as that. Could also bring his lightness up, and I'd like to add a little glow, as he's got some pretty nice hot spots, and that would look cool if it was glowing in the light of Andromeda. Let's add this stylized glow, and the default is a little too much. Let's try this threshold here. Let's threshold it up so it's not as intense, and let's lower the amount and increase the radius. Now one thing you'll notice is that we get, it's actually glowing, I'm not sure, it looks like it's extending the alpha. I'll put this glow before the levels adjustment, and that should stop it from really, I'm not sure what that was, but it was extending the black. And let's just unsolo this for the moment. It's looking nice. It looks a little strong. It looks very strong. It looks way too strong. Let's try maybe this, and maybe lessen it a little. Now I think what we need to do is desaturate this guy, as he has a lot of, well, he has a lot more colour than the background currently does. Actually, let's desaturate the entire scene. I think this Andromeda is not really the colour that I'd like. I'm going to go layer, new adjustment layer, call this, whoops, select the layer, then hit enter, then call it CC. And let's tint this, and instead of just black, I can make this a nice blue colour. Something like that. Yeah, this looks a little ugly at the moment. Actually, it looks very ugly. But what we can do is add the lens flare back in, because we actually still have a flare on this dude's back. I'm not sure exactly where, but he has a flare somewhere. Let's solder him there. Now let's add in a flare of our own. Control Alt Y for another adjustment layer. I'll call this one optical flare. And let's add in optical flares. And let's go to the options. Now, there's plenty of tools for creating your own, but I have a nice preset under Pro Presets 2 that I bought from Video Copilot. It's called Orb Light. And funny enough, we actually have a few relevant ones sitting nearby, such as Mooncam, although I'm not really a fan of this, or the NASA Dark Sky. I much prefer this Orb Light here, and there's so many to choose from. They all look very interesting, but I think I'll go with this one here. That one actually might suit our footage a little better because we have this little rainbow that our character was getting, although I really do like the this rim that we get here, so I'll go with this one. Okay, so now let's grab the camera, because we pasted it into the backgrounds, copy it back and paste it, and now we can change the source type from 2D to 3D, and that will respect the match move. Now we can't see anything. I'm just going to change it to over original and then change the Z position. Okay, we can see it now. I want it about the same depth as Andromeda, since this is where the light is coming from. So about -6,000, and let's bring it up with sort of offset. We can't just move it exactly where we want. We have to sort of move it with the X and Y. It's the easiest way to do it. And that's where I want it. Now let's change the scale of this. The scale and the brightness determine pretty much the size of these things. And if we have a smaller brightness, we need something. But if we have a very small brightness but then a very large scale, let's increase this to maybe 10 or 20, we get larger objects. Let's increase this to 40. Oops, that's 40. And you can see we have very large orbs and such. Now, I may not want them that big, and if we need to change that, we can just lower this to maybe 600, but then bump this up if need be. That's too bright. And I'll just play with where the position is. Okay, that's interesting. And now we can manipulate the center position to sort of see where this flare is coming from. And this is actually casting some nice light on our scene. If we'll probably want to put this under the letterboxing, but above the color correction, so that we get some of the color out of it. And the color is currently set to white, which is what we want. Let's play with this tint for a little bit. It's a little blue. That's what white is, that's what more blue is. I want to play with this because this is drastically affecting the overall look. And you can also go into high dynamic range blue if you so desire. Something like that, so we get a little bit of blue, but mostly white. And let's just have a look at what our character looks like when he appears. So that would be a little bit further on. Yeah, that looks okay. I think the optical flares are certainly blowing out the Andromeda galaxy. It's quite a bit too bright. Let's turn this down to maybe 40. Let's try 20. Though I do need it to get some of the color back in. Let's try 35. Now we can probably increase the contrast on our live action because we have a more contrasty background now. Let's try 0.7. Oh, that's simple white. Abort. Let's put that back to normal and let's go 0.6 on this character. Now his suit's a lot better. Let's try 0.55. Maybe a little dark here. It looks nice here though. I guess we could keyframe it. Keyframe the histogram and set it down here to 0.6, 0.7. Now it sort of looks like the Andromeda Galaxy is blowing out lower than where it should be. Let's try in the optical flares, pushing it up a bit. There we go, that looks better. And let's play with this. Let's find the best possible spot to have our flare. Maybe in front of the astronaut would be cool. Now I might just go through and have a play with some of the settings, just to see what works and what doesn't. Okay, I'll just run through some of the things that I've just done. I've taken the RSMB. It was initially inside the CG, but just on top here. But that was giving us a 1 pixel feather or a half pixel feather that was sort of looking very odd because we had the background layer behind it. And by putting it onto the matted CG already, we don't have that problem. And what I've also done in the background, sorry not the background, in the CG passes, is done a lot of selective color correction. If I get out of the alpha, you can see what this has done here, and not so much this one, but without the two of them you can see that I've brightened both of these up, and a better frame to look at this on might be towards the beginning. If I turn them both off, you can definitely see the difference that makes. I thought that was too flat, that wasn't bright enough, so I've changed both of those. And also in this shot here, sorry, the indirect, which is here, I've actually added a mask, and you can see the difference that this mask makes if I turn it off. There's a lot of indirect that I was getting up there. Let's just compare the two. This is without, and let's check it in the main comp. And then let's turn this mask on. And you can see the difference it makes. I think it might be a little strong. I might bring it up a bit, but apart from that I think it looks good. I can't just move it up because I have two keyframes here, but I can move it up maybe a notch on either keyframes and shift up to move it up. And there it is, a little more subtle. Now something I'd like to do is actually get the horizon, if we go into the background, this was a blue horizon, and unfortunately we lost all that colour when we tinted it, but I'd sort of like it back. And a way we can do that is just grabbing it in here, copying it. Actually, we'll turn it off for now, and pasting it in the passes. And there we have the horizon. Excellent, and in the next lesson we'll be adding in our depth of field. In this lesson we'll composite our depth of field, and to do that we'll have to generate, or we'll have to comp our depth map. And to do that, let's grab the master layer's depth, drag that to a new comp, and we can't see anything, but we can add the extractor. That should give us our depth. And we need to add in the depth of our character as well. That would be under, so let's just quickly rename this depth comp, then the pre-comps, and let's grab the character depth. What's the character depth? If we have a look in the info, we should be able to see hopefully some data. Actually no, we need to extract it first. And there we have the data, and that simply needs to be multiplied by the alpha of the character master beauty. Okay, there we have the depth for everything. Something that's pretty important is that it goes from black to white, but then back to black. And you'll notice that the alpha is 1. What we need to do is mat the depth layer. And we can do that by grabbing, say, the master beauty, alpha matting that, and then we can add, if we Alt 4 we have an alpha, then we can add white, which would essentially be infinity. And don't worry if you're seeing these artifacts at half res, at full res it's all good. And I'm used to my depth maps being the other way around, so I'm going to add invert to this. Yeah, this is how I'm used to seeing it. Okay, that's good. Let's bring this into shot 1, and that will be under pre-comps, our depth comp. Let's switch that off, and let's add the layer, well, it's an adjustment layer. Call this one out depth of field, put it under the letterbox, and I'm going to put the depth comp at the very back because we don't need it. We'll delete this red solid. And under depth of field, I'm going to use the plugin out of focus. It gives a better blur and looks better, and it's quicker than the inbuilt depth of field. But that certainly works if you don't have the particular plugin, just the lens blur. But depth of field is what I like to use. And let's go depth layer, depth comp. Now if we set the radius a bit higher, you should see our depth of field there. And that's looking very interesting. 10 might be a little too high, it sort of looks like a macro shot. Now we need to decide how we'd like to use this depth of field, what we'd like to focus on, because I'd like to do a rack focus. And what do I want to focus on first? Let's try at the very start, frame 0, let's have it focus at infinity, and then, actually, focal point, and then maybe at frame 76, be a nice long focus in on our character, and have it focus on our guy, astronaut, and maybe we can tone down the amount of depth of field. The radius of 10 is a little high. Let's hit U. I'm also going to keyframe the radius, so it starts off at 10 and then maybe comes down to 6. And that way we're still getting blur, but it's not extremely out of focus. Also, what I'd like at the start is a additive dissolve, and to do that we can go layer, new solid, get a white solid, call this our dissolve, set it to add, and that'll add everything, and then T, let's give it 20 odd frames, and we can select them and choose easy ease, and also we can have a blur as well, a blur on our blur. Let's add in out of focus, and let's set this to 50, and let's start at start, radius comes down to 0, and easy ease these. Let's put both of these under our letterbox, and let's see what we get with this. Well, that was way too quick. I won't show you because I'm embarrassed about how bad it looks, so I'll put these forward quite a lot. Okay, here's a preview, and I think I went a bit overboard on the amount of depth of field. I'll bring that quite a bit down with the radius. I'll just exit full screen. Radius on this one here, I believe. And that's the dissolve. The depth of field. It ends up being 6. Let's try 3. Let's have a look. Yeah, I think that's a lot better. Maybe even less. Maybe let's try. I just want to be able to see more of the galaxy, more detail in it. Yeah, value of 2 is nice. Good to see most of the things, but we still know that there's depth of field in here. Now, what I'd like to do is sort of add the glow on top of the astronaut, because that was actually underneath. And if we go to a part where there's a lot of a lot of depth of field, I'd like to add the glow after that. Here it is currently, this with the glow, that's without. Let's just take a screenshot, and the way we can do this is if we apply this depth of field to the matte. And to do that, I'm going to create a new pre-comp, and that will involve the character master beauty, and this will be called the character matte depth of field. Then the pre-comps, grab in undershot 1 the blur, so the depth of field and its depth comp, both of those, paste them in here. So now we're getting the depth of field on our character. If we Alt 4, you can see the matte for that. And now under shot 1 we can add a adjustment layer, call this character glow, map that to the character matte depth of field, I'll format that, put that below the letterbox, and now cut the glow from here afterwards. And you might need to actually grab the glow and the levels, cut both of those, so now he doesn't have anywhere near as much color correction, and put them on the character glow. I think I might tone down the levels a bit. Now we can compare the two. Before we were getting this really ugly edge, but now it's a lot softer and actually fits with the depth of field. Just one more thing, I'd like the horizon to have a bit more colour. Let's go to layer solid settings and reduce the amount of blue. Now unfortunately it's not updating for us, but I guess what we could do is instead of adding that, we can add fill. Hopefully that will update for us live. And it does, nice. Now the bluer we go, the dimmer it gets, but I'll pick the colour that I want. Sort of this blue here. Then we could change the levels on this to make it a bit brighter. There we go. And that looks good. I think I'd like the stars to shine a bit brighter, and that would be in background. Where are you, stars? Let's increase the brightness after the arithmetic, so we're still keeping the darkness. And that's what we get. If we go into shot 1, let's just see whether that was a bit overboard. It would appear so. Actually, I do like it. Maybe a little smaller. Let's take a screenshot and let's change the scale to 2. Maybe turn it back just a bit. Yeah, that looks nice. Cool. Now another thing we need to do is add some grain, as this live action character is quite grainy. Let's preview. Yeah, it's quite a lot of grain. And currently the CG has none. So in the next lesson we'll be compositing our grain in with the help of the match grain effect and a grain card. In this lesson we'll be adding grain into our scene. We'll be doing that with the help of a grain card. After Effects can add its own grain with the add grain effect, but the presets are all film stock. I believe this was shot on an F3, Sony F3, and this grain card here, although it's not an F3, it's an HV40, I think will be a bit more similar to the F3 than the add grain effect, and a little bit quicker too. Now to do this, let's click into our composition and add a new adjustment layer and add the match grain effect. And I'll just rename this as grain. And let's, I think I've already put the HV40 grain card down the very bottom, out of sight, turned off, and let's reference that. And under the tweaking, this is where the where we can choose the settings of this. I need to zoom in at full res to be able to see exactly how much grain I want or don't want. Okay, now that's not quite enough. The character is quite grainy, so I'd like to increase this, but also note that we added a blur on top of the character, which pretty much removed all that grain. Well, not all of it, but a significant portion. We're going to have to sort of tweak the grain so that it appears more on him when he's blurry and none on him when he's completely in focus, because the live action has its own grain that will be visible when he's not blurry. Keeping that in mind, I'd like to increase the amount of grain here, maybe to 2 or 1.5. That looks good. And I'm going to put this underneath the letterbox above everything else. And what I want to do is, under project, under the pre-comps, wherever these are, I'd like to grab the the character matte depth of field, and this is just the live action character with the depth of field applied, which will give us an accurate matte for this. And if we just go back to shot 1 and put this on top here, I'd like to alpha invert this, which means that the grain isn't going to appear on the character. Now that's what I want at the end when there is no blur, but at the start when there is a blur, I do actually want to grain this character. And the way I can do that is if I find the blur layer, these are the keyframes here. This is where we have full blur, and this is where we have no blur. And this, where we have no blur on frame 87, is where I don't want any grain to be applied. So at frame 87, I want this matte to take full effect here. And that's, I'll do that by simply changing the opacity. So at frame 87, this matte is fully opaque, and the grain card will be avoiding it. But at frame 42, this is going to be completely transparent, and that means that the grain is going to it's going to affect our character, who's had his grain drastically reduced by the blur. And if we just go into the grain and change this from preview, or we can keep it on preview just to be quicker, we can see that we have the grain here on the character now, but we do not have any grain on the character, and in between we have a 50-50 mix. And I'm sure you're all aware that never add the grain before any blurs or color corrections, because that is just going to either completely remove or mess up the grain. Here we have a nice transition between on and off, and let's just change the viewing output to final output, and I think we're just about ready to render this scene out. I only rendered, I think, to a frame 153, so I'm just going to go back and render the rest of the sequence, and then we'll be pretty much done. Alrighty, I finally finished rendering the rest of those frames there. It goes from 1 to 171, and this is the, well, most of the sequence here anyway, completed, and here's the breakdown included as well. And that's it for shot 1, which was the bulk of this tutorial. In the next 2 lessons, I'll just be covering a brief overview of how I completed shot 2, which was mainly a lot of manual work to be done, but hope you get something out of that as well. So I'll see you in the next lesson. In this lesson we're going to do a shot overview of shot 2 in the sequence. This shot involves a lot of manual labour, lots of very fiddly, boring tasks, so I thought I'd do just an overview of how I approached the different challenges in this shot, and instead of going through real time like we did in shot 1. But we'll be continuing where we left off. I'm using the very last Maya scene file that we used in shot 1, and I've just saved it as shot 2. And the reason we need the previous shot is so that we can, on our reflective helmet, reflect the displaced moon geometry that we'd created in the previous lessons. Also note that I've actually flipped the shot. You can see that the NASA logo is around the wrong way, and that was just an editing decision to help it cut better with the previous shot. And it won't really matter because we can cut that out in the 235. Now the first and biggest task was to match the movement of the live action footage with a proxy piece of geometry, which is this here. I just created this, I eyeballed it. It's probably not accurate at all. It sort of just does the job. It sort of just looks right. And what would have been a lot more helpful is if I had measurements of the actual helmet, and then I could have modeled it to specification, and that would have made the whole process a lot more accurate and easier. But I did the best with what I had and just created this from sight, and essentially I was just trying to line up this base here with the I'm not sure what that is, a collar, a really big collar, and I've keyframed all translate and rotate attributes, and I've tried to match it as best I can. This took a very, very long time, and the way I did this was you can see that I've set a keyframe such that frame 137, and then on frame 132, and I've left 5 keyframes or so in between, and sort of got them for free. If you line it up well on 2 frames, 5 or so frames apart, you can get a lot of keyframes for free. Now that didn't work so well back here. I set out creating keyframes 5 or so apart, but I had to come in and manually adjust them frame by frame, and as you can see it's not perfect, but I did the best job I could. And when the character lifts his visor up, I sort of just completely ignored it and got the general movement of him down pat. And then what I did is, if I just go into the outliner, I have the actual pieces of geometry underneath, and I've also modeled these from, I just eyeballed these as well. And now just a tip, if you want to hide the parent but want to be able to see the children, what you need to do is just click on the parent geometry, press the down arrow, and then hit Ctrl H, and that selects the shape node and hides that but leaves the children visible. So once I had the match move down pat, I modelled these and sort of put them into place. And this gold helmet here is the very protective. I'm sure you've seen astronauts in space. They have like this very coppery, goldy looking helmet when they're doing their spacewalks to protect their eyes. So he wears this for some of the shot, and then I keyframe this to sort of rotate up, and this will be going underneath his white visor here. So this rotates up, he lifts up his visor to reveal the glass helmet. And because these are parented to the match move, I can simply create only a few keyframes to get this rotation right, and it inherits the movement of the match move. If we take a look at, I've just done 2 renders. This is what the gold helmet looks like, and this is what the gold helmet and the glass helmet look like together. So that's sort of what they look like in the final render. And let's quickly talk about the materials. We're going to the hypershade. I'll just expand the metal material first. This is sort of the coppery material. And this is just an MIA X passes material. Where are we? Here we are. And in the attributes, let's just go through these. It sort of has an orangey colour. Has very little diffuse though, so this is barely affecting it at all. It's mainly the reflection that matters, and the reflectivity is being controlled by this multiply divide node, which is multiplying the spec map by 20. If we have a look in our graph editor, so that's our spec here, and essentially what this is, it's a texture that I made. I'll just view this here, and what this is I took from Video Copart. They have lots of sort of glass elements that is used in the plug-in optical flares. I took some of these glass scratches and combined them with sort of a chalkboard texture, because chalkboards often have scratches and such. And I just combined them in Photoshop, and you can see there's not a lot of lighter colors, and that's why I've multiplied them by 20 with this multiply divide node, and used that as the spec map. I've set the glossiness to 0.9, and that's sort of just to make it not look 100% like a mirror, but pretty clear with a little bit of blurriness to it. And also there's additional blur here caused by the motion blur. I thought it would be better to just blur it inside of Maya, because forced motion blur such as RSMB would probably have a difficult time working out what's going on here. And the render time isn't too bad at all. Now the reflection color that we're getting is being driven by this ramp here, and it goes from sort of a lighter orange to a more burnt orange. And I have a sample info node here, just plugging its facing ratio into the V coordinate, and that sort of allows us to get this color here in the very center of the helmet, but on the edges we start to get this more orangey, more burnt reflection, and that will always be on the edges no matter which way the helmet faces. For the glass material, I think it was just a standard presets glass physical, and I may have adjusted some things there, but it's pretty standard material to make. It's what it looks like, and of course in copositing we'll sort of tweak this so that we can see the character's face behind it, because you get to see his face. Looking back on the shot, I think something that could be improved is maybe adding the facing ratio to reduce the reflection around the sides, because I didn't actually model the some proxy geometry for his actual helmet to sort of cast shadows on these edges here, or on this bit here, which is actually behind his epic collar. If we had done a facing ratio on the reflection, we'd get far less reflection here, and we wouldn't really need to sort of erode them in copositing or cast shadows with shadow casting geometry. Now let's take a look at the lighting. As you can see, we have this very nice reflection of the Andromeda Galaxy, and also we do have shadows here. we go into the perspective view. Let's take a look at what we have here. We have the original light sort of casting light on the moon geometry, which is currently hidden at the moment, and also have a spotlight which I've aimed through a camera. And if we go panels perspective, camera shape 1, this is a spotlight casting light on the scene, and that's to replicate the Andromeda Galaxy. Go into perspective and maybe turn materials on, maybe go viewport 2.0. You can see that I created this giant sort of half sphere to place the Andromeda Galaxy on, and this is very bright, as you can see. And I've, in the render settings under final gathering, the indirect lighting, I've turned the secondary diffuse scale to 5, so this is casting a fair amount of light on the scene, and we're also getting the shadows from the original light here, and that is mainly providing light to the displaced moon geometry, as well as just to make it more noticeable in the reflection here. And one more important thing would be a matte render layer, and this will help us separate the copper or the reflective gold from the glass material, so that we can make the glass material transparent and show the astronaut's face underneath, as you can see, like so. Just red and green surface shaders there, and I think that's about it. In the next lesson we'll go through the process of compositing this shot in After Effects. In this lesson we'll do an overview of how shot 2 was composited inside of After Effects. Here's the finished shot right here, and I think it looks really nice. Let's go through all these layers here that we have, see how this was composited, and we'll start with the live action footage. And the effects for this layer was simply some levels and curves to sort of essentially darken the footage. If we turn those off, you can see it's darker, and I think the curves are more in the blue channel to selectively change the colours. As you'll note, it goes from sort of a more neutral yellowy colour to more blue, which suits our moon environment. And above that we have a paint fix. Let's just hit U to see where this is going on. Now the live action character, he has his own sort of glass or plastic visor, and that was sort of interfering in some situations with the CG visor, and that had to be removed. So that was simply removed with a paint fix and filled with black to get rid of that, to match the back or the shadowed hood that he has on. And then above that we have the glass layer. It has an out of focus effect, which is a plug-in just to sort of take the edge off. You could easily achieve this with a fast blow, but I just like the out of focus effect. And this itself has a mask, and that's sort of just cutting off the areas where this mask would be behind this visor or unseen. That's what that mask is doing there, and this is being alpha matted to the glass mat, which if you remember from the CG lessons, we had set up a matte layer for the glass and copper layers, and I've just simply set the matte and filled it there. Now we have the glass side shadow. In the previous lesson we were talking about how we could use facing ratios to reduce the shadow on the sides where there really should be a shadow, and in this case I've just done a comp fix and just filled it with black and used a mask set to subtract to feather a black shadow in, and we have a second one there to sort of highlight the effect. And above that we have the gold. So what the gold looks like here. Let's just go back so you can see it a bit clearer. the gold looking very nice. Again, we have the out of focus effect just to take the edge off of it, and this has another mask to remove certain unwanted parts, and this is being matted to the gold mat. And above that we have a glove shadow. If I turn this on, this is to sort of cast a shadow where his glove is interacting with the helmet, and that mask I've actually copied from the actual glove roto layer, which I had to roto to put on top. And here's another glove shadow just to increase the effect. And down here I have a glass shadow to sort of remove the reflection where his collar would be. I have another one of those. And here we have the face layer. This is just a live action. I've sort of masked it off fairly crudely, but this is just essentially his face, and that's being set to screen so that we can see his face through the glass layer, and that allows us to see sort of half of his face, half of the glass. And as you know, the screen mat is simply adding the two together but capping it off at a value of 1. If we set this to add, it would probably be a little too intense. Now we have the hat, which is a very important mask. As you can see, it's sort of adding back his collar and the rest of his helmet, because before the copper helmet was extending too far. We've trimmed that off there, and the very important glove roto layer, and that sort of combines with the shadow to give a nice effect there. I think that looks pretty good for a simple shadow. Now before we check the color correction, let's just go back to the bottom and turn on the other layers. We have stars, as we added in. I think I might have just copied and pasted them from shot 1 that we composited. And again, that's fractal noise, arithmetic to clamp the values, levels to very much increase the brightness, and an out of focus to give us these nice out of focus stars. Then we have the Andromeda Galaxy being set to add, and that essentially just adds a little bit of variation. I think that's sort of the nebula clouds that's giving off that effect there. It's pretty subtle, but it's helping us. And then we have color correction for the stars and the Andromeda, just to sort of crush them down a bit. And then we have the layer is called Glow, and this is essentially our horizon layer. It's a pale blue solid, I believe. This is being tinted currently to white, and being set to add to give us our subtle horizon glow. Then up to the very top, we have our overall glow. This here is essentially, I've set the threshold to sort of just affect the reflection of Andromeda on the copper, and probably it affects the glass a little bit. If we turn it off, yep. The reason I'm using a sapphire glow, which is the plug-in, is I prefer it. It gives more of a softer result than the default glow, which I prefer. And then above that we have a general tint, and this tint is being tinted to sort of pale, very pale blue. And here we have an optical flare to give us back our color and some light. And this is actually being luma inverted to the copper mat. We've created a pre-comp here called optical flare luma mat, and this is essentially telling optical flares not to affect any areas that are currently white, which is the gold or copper helmet that he has. And without this mat, it sort of just blew it out a little bit too much, I thought. So that's why we have the luma invert here. And above that we have general color correction with the levels, just to sort of give us some more contrast. And then we have our grain with the match grain referencing an HV40 grain card. And that's about it for this shot. I have it letterboxed here, so I've cut out the NASA, the backwards NASA logo, and that's all there is to it. Here's the breakdowns at the moment for both shots 1 and 2. That brings us to the end of this course. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something. See you next time.